Hello, everyone, and welcome to Admissions for Athletes, an interview series in which we talk to experts to demystify the college admissions and athletic process. I'm really excited for today's guest and just the sheer depth of his expertise. Today, we're chatting with Matt Arant. He is the Assistant Director of Regional Admission and Athletic Liaison at Franklin&Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Hey, Matt.
Hi.
Matt was the captain of the varsity tennis team while attending the University of Ozarks. He went on to earn a master's in public administration from the University of Kentucky, which led to work in education policy at two separate national nonprofits prior to joining Franklin&Marshall. At the end of this interview, we'll have a chance to hear from him what he's up to next and where we can find him. So Matt, thank you. Welcome to the show. Your passion for higher education, for public policy in the education sector, and just athletics is so clear. We're so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start right at the beginning. Working in admissions, at what point do coaches at Franklin&Marshall reach out to you regarding a student athlete that they are interested in? And when do they first come on your radar?
F&M, as well as a lot of other Division III and certain D1 schools offer, it's called the pre-read process. It's a preliminary evaluation of a student athlete's admissibility. It varies by school. So the NESCAC, which is the New England Small College Athletic Conference, and they're very great schools, very strong athletics. Mm-hmm. They typically don't start their pre-process until July 1st. Other schools start it earlier in the spring. So typically might be April 1st of that student athlete's junior year. And I've kind of prefaced this by saying I'll largely talk about the Division III perspective, just because it's a bit more complicated and involved than Division I and Division II. Division I, Division II, you're largely going through the college's athletic department's compliance offices, specifically making sure you're eligible in terms of your GPA. It used to be test scores, now test optional, as well as you have to take a certain number of core courses. If you fulfill those requirements, ABC, you're pretty much done. Division III is a bit more complicated because we don't have the athletic scholarship component. So it is largely being driven as a partnership between athletics and admission. That's why I'm the liaison, which I work in the Office of Admission, but I am the point person and connection to all of our sports on campus. So for example, F&M has 27 sports. Most of them are Division III. We do have a couple of Division I sports. I know we'll talk about that a bit later. Yeah. And what I do is typically be that go-between from the athletic director, coaches, as well as our dean and VP and various admission officers in our office. So the pre-read is kind of the main component of that partnership and how it relates to the recruitment process. I don't recruit any athletes per se. That is still the coach's responsibility. What I do instead is offer the perspective of what it means to them being a potential fit for us as a student. And then athletics might play a little bit, but it's largely driven by the admissibility academically of the student. Usually 2 or 3 components of that pre-read. It's going to be your transcript, senior year courses, which are either confirmed or planned, depending on when you submit those. If you are applying with test scores, an unofficial copy of either your SAT or ACT. And then for some schools where financial aid is a very kind of key piece of the process, they will like to see a copy of your net price calculator. That is a tool the College Board has for every college, in which you're able to get a quick snapshot of what your estimated financial aid package will be at the respective school. So I get all the information, and then I offer a likely or unlikely, but at the end of the day, it's a way for us to kind of help coaches understand, here's what a profile student athlete looks like at an F&M or an Amherst or a Pomona or a U Chicago or a Colgate, place like that. Yeah. And then we use that information to give to the coaches, and then they get that feedback to the players directly. I don't have any contact with the players. It's more largely driven by the coaches themselves. And so in terms of timeline, that's typically going to be happening. It depends on sports as well. Field hockey, lacrosse, soccer. Those are usually our earliest sports. So when I do pre-reads, those are sports I hear from the first. Was volleyball as well. And those are going to be largely going to be the spring of the student athlete's junior year. And then largely it's going to be in the summer months. And that's pretty much most sports except for football, because football, oftentimes there's a bit more crossover between D1 and D3. So for example, if there's a high prospect target football wise at a strong D3 school, they may be getting kind of preferred walk-on offers at a Patriot League school or an Ivy League school. which means that process is a bit longer than, say, a kid looking just at Division three, where you can kind of figure out pretty early on. So typically it's going to be that junior year, most likely the spring and early summer, and then other sports more fluid, which will be later towards the fall, and then going up into that deadline of their rising senior year.
It's really interesting. Something that stood out to me, what you just said, was just how sports specific it is. And that's something I've been hearing a lot of is, football is so different from volleyball, which is different from tennis. And just the importance of really reaching out specifically to the coaches or schools you're interested in and finding out, if their process is at all different, and asking the coach to let you know specifically what information you need to give them so that they can keep the ball rolling. A lot of schools used to use an academic index, which is basically an evaluation of what the average student looks like at a particular school, and making sure that an athletic candidate is one standard deviation within that range. And then, band system is pretty popular as well, which is, ABC. That pre-read, that's so interesting. So it sounds like you kind of compare a prospective student's profile against the average student. And just, is it based on any sort of rubric, or is just your knowledge of?
From the admissions side, it's largely based upon what we know about a typical student. In terms of like the banding or the ranks, what our coaches do, they usually rank into 3 different categories by a front rush, which was a big platform colleges use. We use CRM computer. It's a fancy word for like a platform that admission officers use to pretty much track everything. So ours is Slate, and then athletics use what's called Front Rush, which is their kind of a big platform. They can kind of chart communication with recruits, kind of give us access to their virtual board to kind of show us where these rankings are by position, overall rank. And so for us, we have a 3-layer system. Actually 4, but 3 is more recruited. So your 1 would be an immediate starter, 2 would be future impact player, and then 3 would be depth player. And that's through Slate. So when I see the pre-read, I'll be able to see not only the transcripts, the financial aid potential, the testing, but I also see that coach rating as well as other information about the student, which high school they go to, which geo market, which sport, those information too. But that coach rating comes into play in terms of the student may not be the strongest academically compared to other peers, whether at their school or other athletes, but they bring another dimension to the process. Oh, there'd be potential conference champion or national All-American or things like that.
So the coach does rank their recruits, and that impacts how you evaluate them.
Yes.
So it sounds like coach will put more weight behind, obviously, like an immediate starter, for example. Can that make a significant impact?
It's pretty flexible, and also depends upon the school itself, right? We always say it's sports specific, but it's very much school specific as well. So for Division III schools, that's probably the most variety as you'll see out of all the divisions in terms of size of school, selectivity, all that. So for example, the women's D3 national championship happened this past week. It was NYU and Smith. NYU has 30,000 undergrads. Smith has 2,500. Yet they can play each other in the same tournament. Whereas Division I, but by and large, those Division I Power 5, they're all in that general range of students. Whereas D3 can pretty much span the spectrum of private, religious affiliated, unaffiliated, public, state, regional schools, large doctoral research universities. They can be in the same conference as well. So for example, for us, we're in the same conference as Johns Hopkins, which is a world-class PhD producing school, whereas F&M is undergraduate only. So there's a lot of kind of variety there. So it depends on the school itself in terms of the selectivity as well as kind of other priorities, which is more in line with the admissions process. As I mentioned, it's very much a driving force. There's a lot of contextuality, a lot of nuance. It's not kind of a one-size-fits-all approach in terms of evaluating the student athlete from that perspective.
That's really interesting. And I think that's a really important question for student athletes to ask is the selectivity piece. Is their profile a little bit off of what the standard student looks like? How far off is it allowed to be? One of the other things I'm hearing a lot of is colleges really want to make sure that every student's going to thrive there.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit cagey to admit students who they think are going to struggle academically. And so are coaches.
Yeah, because that's a retention issue. And then also, depending on the school itself, if it's a school that gets a lot of applications and it's a high selectivity rating, low admit rate, if you bring in a student athlete that may not be the best, they might leave after a semester or a year, you have essentially lost not only that person, but 10 or 15 other folks that could have done the work that we had to deny or waitlist because there's not enough room in the class for that person. So it's just, like I said, it's very much dependent on the school itself. But what's good about this is you can actually see common data sets on each school's website. You can actually see, oh, here's what it means here's the applicant profile of a NESCAC school versus a UAA, like your U Chicago's, your Wash U's, school like that. You're not just kind of flying blind. Oh, here's the admit rate, but not all admit rates are built the same way as not all GPAs are built the same as well.
Just to reiterate a point for the student athletes watching, if you're not sure, reach out to the coach and ask them.
It's all about doing your homework, connecting with the right folks, whether it's the territory manager based upon where you go to high school and the coach and assistant coaches who do the preliminary evaluations, recruiting, things like that.
What kind of grades, what kind of GPA, standardized test scores do prospective student athletes really need to have for a school like Franklin&Marshall, which is a small school and it has a 36% acceptance rate?
It just sounds like I say it depends again, but it really does because F&M specifically doesn't have an average GPA. So what we do is, like I mentioned, a 4.0 at one school and one curriculum is very different than a 4.0 at another curriculum and another rigor. So, for example, if you have straight A's but not taking any classes that are of any added weight and they're offered to you, that looks different than a student that is taking all they can. For us, it's very much looking at the rigor itself because we are able to take a deep dive at these transcripts. So in terms of the testing, we typically give them a threshold, right? So for example, on a pre-read, I would write SAT 1260 needs to apply test optional. So I kind of give them kind of the right off the bat, your score is fine in some context, but just not competitive for the respective school you're applying to. You should apply test optional. Just kind of gives them some initial feedback there. We typically use kind of that middle 50% range is kind of the range we use. So going back to that bell curve kind of metaphor, you have the two ends that are very negative and very positive. Middle, that's going to be that the middle 50% range is largely in that big bell curve. So it could be a 1300 to 1420. It could be, and as you get more selective, that bell kind of tightens a little bit. So it's largely school specific based upon the profile of the student. Say, oh, here's your test score. Here's how it falls within our range. Gives them the green light to either submit test scores or probably apply test optional. So it's kind of a give and take back and forth between the student athletes and the students as well as the colleges that they're looking at.
You know, it's such an incredible advantage because right now with this test optional piece, which as we're seeing is now swinging back toward not being optional, being a requirement again, students are now sort of in this limbo space where if they're on that, that 25th percentile, they're not sure what to do. My business partner and I are always trying to guide students on how to navigate that piece without talking to someone with a direct line to the admissions office. They don't know if it's going to help them or hurt them because there is a negative inference if you do not turn in scores. The top schools, the most selective schools, they assume you did not do well if you do not turn in those scores. And it really, we've seen it really impact kids. It's been kind of really heartbreaking on our end how many kids have listened to the test optional, but then not understood that test optional doesn't always mean test optional.
And that can even go towards like scholarships, for example. Some schools may say they're test optional, but then if you want to apply for a full tuition merit scholarship, you're probably going to have a test. So it's not test optional in that respect. But then some schools have kind of swung in the complete other direction and becomes test blind. So you can have a perfect score and the schools have no idea because it's not there. So giving students options always helps. And it goes back to looking at the school and going back to seeing what the school has done in years past, right? We talked about COVID initially, how a lot of these schools that were requiring tests, they went test optional because of the, I guess, capability of students being able to take tests.
Yeah, they weren't able to take it safely. Yeah.
So exactly. So that means that applications shot through the roof, which meant selectivity and admit rates acted accordingly. So it's just a lot of kind of back and forth. So you can actually see what a school was like pre-COVID and then during post-COVID to see, is that 32 ACT still in the wheelhouse of that school, or was that a pre-COVID test required, or was that a post-COVID test optional? Hopefully we'll kind of taper off in the next year or so because we're kind of in that final year, which we're not seeing any transcripts that have any mention of COVID because it's kind of been through that whole life cycle already.
It's really interesting. So Michael, my business partner, always talks about, he's like, everything's optional. AP classes are optional, honors, extracurriculars, running for president, of your student body. All of these are optional. But if you want to go to the top school, you should be doing the optional thing. So I'm always like, that's pretty good advice. And we also give the same parameters of like, you want to hit that middle 50%.
AP course as well. Yeah. If you have the 4s and the 5s, submit those also, because for me, hypothetically, that's telling me a lot more than an SAT. It just gives you another dimension of competitiveness, which only helps your chances at these schools that you might not have thought about being an option, but with athletics being a potential hook, you might be getting a bit more, not necessarily an advantage, but another way in which you can be evaluated by the college is having that strong athletics potentiality for the respective sport that's what you're applying to.
I'm just going to reiterate this one more time, just the advantage that athletes have in terms of the testing piece. Like, take the test, prepare for them, do your best, and then let the coach guide you and let the athletic liaison guide you. Okay, so you mentioned earlier, so you have mostly D3 sports, and then wrestling's D1.
And then we have squash, which it's non-divisional, but we kind of view it as more of a Division 1 because it's not a division.
Does that process, the recruitment process or athletic liaison assessment, differ in any way for those athletes who are coming into Division 1 or non-division?
It's largely going to be the same process in terms of the admission, because even just this past year, we have added, I think it's 1 scholarship for athletics for wrestling. Okay. With that 1 scholarship, that's the only kind of deviation from looking at a track and field versus a Division 1 wrestler. So it's a little bit different just because of like maybe the profile of the student, maybe a bit different because they're looking at other Division 1 schools, but the process itself largely stays the same in terms of the pre-read process. Components are the same, your transcript, your test scores, all that. It's just a matter of adding that 1 scholarship that's added to their already financial aid package. So that's the only main difference that we've seen.
Great. Okay, Matt, could you tell us a do and a don't for student athletes out there or their parents in terms of those who really would love to play a sport in college?
What you want to do if you're applying to Division 3 school specifically, which is being reviewed by admission folks, not compliance officers, is that they don't want to see your application within a minute or two say, oh, this is an athlete application. Okay, going from there. So whether that means writing only about athletics in your essay, having recommendation letters being sent by coaches and no other teachers, activities largely being one-dimensional. So that's the big kind of don't for me is when you're looking at schools, athletics is going to be a big piece, obviously, but you want to make sure that, God forbid, you get hurt or you just don't like playing anymore. You still want to be a part of that community. So that starts with engaging with the entire college, not just the athletics department, whether that's doing a specific tour with the admission office, knowing who your territory manager is, not just the assistant coach of your sport, maybe connecting with faculty and staff, really make that application be multidimensional.
That's great. It's really, really great and really important advice, I think, for student athletes. So you're going to be going to school there, you're going to be participating in so many aspects of life. It's really important for students to feel at home. Do you have any other tips to share with student athletes and parents about, finding that right school for them?
Yeah. So I also mentioned when I'm doing like panels is if there's any students that plays an individual sport, right? So or time specific. So cross country, track and field, tennis, golf, swimming, their process isn't usually the same as a team sport athlete. And so I always use cross country as an example of when I read applications and I see a certain time and they were all state, I'll look on our website and see how they fit in with our times. And by and large, these are already viable academic candidates because typically cross country has usually the highest GPAs in terms of all the sports on campus. So that may not be, it's a general kind of.
It is,
because they have that, if you have a discipline to run that far consistently, you're going to have good discipline when it goes to being in the classroom and labs, stuff like that. So what I've been doing the last couple of years is when I'm reading the application, if you find anything in the activities that mentions sports success and they're not tagged as an athlete, let me know because I can always take a look and say, oh, here's a pole vaulter from some really strong prep school in New England or a very strong suburban Chicago public. but they didn't put track and field or swimming on the application, but their distance or their time is in line with a potential conference place as a first year. Wow. I'll let the coach know, and then they can kind of take it from there. So don't discount athletics. If you really want to look at playing in college, like I mentioned earlier, it's another way for you to have an advantage in the overall process, because schools that are only admitting 4 or 5% of their students still have large athletic departments. So think about that when you're looking at those schools like your UAAs I mentioned, Ivies, Patriot, that have those really high selectivity, but also 30 plus sports in the department. They have to bring they have to have student athletes to fill those rosters, right? So just think about
it's a different piece of the puzzle. Yeah,
exactly. And those individual sports I've seen a bit more of that, just because they're not viewing the process typically the same way as a team sport, because it's all based upon here's how I competed. It's not more of like there's no like showcase in the same level you have like for field hockey or volleyball or lacrosse.
That's so insightful. So obviously we've seen, that you have such deep experience and knowledge of this world. So I want to hear a little bit more tell us about your plans. You're launching your company. You're doing something really cool next year that obviously is close to my heart as well. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to, and then how our viewers can connect with you.
I'll be opening up my own independent consulting for college recruitment, and it's largely going to be for your Division III athletics, just offering college counseling with that added dimension of the athletic recruitment process, whether it's just understanding what it means to go to Division III school athletically, offering all the same services that independent counselor does, your list creation guidance, goal setting, essay prep, college list creation, consultations, but then adding that specific piece of the athletics component. I will be based in the Texas, Austin, San Antonio, Texas area, but hopefully to have clients from all over, just because I've worked in the space in which I've been able to engage with counselors in high schools from all over the country already. So that'll be kind of base of operations, but largely going to be focusing on those applicants that are maybe looking to play sports in college, specifically at that Division III level.
In closing, I always like to share an interesting fact about student athletes. Matt, did you know that just 7% of high school athletes go on to play in college? And of that, only 2% play Division I.
Yep. That makes sense. I didn't know the exact numbers, but going back to Division I, Division II, Division III actually has the most colleges within that list. And so like we always talk about when I talk to counselors that have student athletes, it's usually that D1 or bust mentality. And it can be largely geographic. Like when I recruit largely in the South. So it's very much, I want to play sports at insert SEC or ACC, Big 12 school. But like they just don't have the chops, and for those students, they're already being recruited 9th, 10th grade at the latest. So I always kind of try to tell families that you can have that option, but there's a lot of options to look at that are going to help you not only athletically but post-grad academically, because these schools I mentioned earlier, they have world-class alumni networks all across the world. So if you go to one of those schools and you do well and you make your network connections, you're going to be just fine. Don't view Division I as kind of the be all end all. There are a lot more schools out there that can offer unparalleled experiences for you, both inside and outside the classroom.
Yeah. And that, still allow you to do what you love, play sport in college, but also, have a little bit more of a healthy life balance as well. Thank you again for joining us and for sharing your expertise and giving such great advice to our viewers. As I mentioned, I'm going to do a little recap in the show notes, so you'll have all the resources that Matt mentioned and some highlights as well, so you can learn more about Matt there. And then for all things academic, feel free to reach out to me by visiting Ivy Method Tutors or emailing me directly at peyton@ivymethodtutors.com. So we're here to support. Any questions, just give us a call. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next episode. Bye.